This year's Dudley Jazz Fest will take place on Saturday, July 27th at Hannon Park in Dorchester. To tell us about it is its founder and a regular performer, Fred Woodard. Thank you very much for being with us, Fred.
Glad to be here.
Fred, go back to the beginning of this. What made you decide to have this outdoor jazz fest?
Well, it was just, I wanted to enrich my community and expose them to jazz music free of charge. In a way, I look at it as converting folks or exposing folks to this art form. I figure if they don't have to pay for it, then it's something that they're more apt to go and check out. So it really stemmed from that idea of creating something in my neighborhood that is entertaining, but also something that's enriching culturally. So that's really the main reason. Also to give my fellow jazz musicians a chance to showcase their talents.
Well, this is also about continuing relationships with these performers too, because you've played with some of them. One of them who's coming up at this year's event, Salim Washington. Talk about your history with Salim.
My history with Salim goes way back to the mid-'80s. He and I played at a club called Wally's, which is
which is still there.
Still there, yeah. And that was back in the mid-'80s. So he was there along with another saxophonist named Curtis Rivers. We were all really tight. We consider each other family, along with some other folks. And I know him from there. And his history is very interesting because he grew up in Detroit, spent some time learning his about music there. His first instrument was trumpet. And then upon hearing John Coltrane, he converted to jazz and also the saxophone. And he later went to Harvard University, came to Boston in '76 to attend Harvard University, and then dropped out from Harvard and decided he wanted to pursue jazz as a career. So he spent a lot of time around Boston playing in various clubs. And the most important thing to come out of that is his opportunity to play with Billy Skinner. He has since passed on, but he was a very well-known trumpeter in the Boston area. And they wound up doing recording and doing some touring in Europe. And then after that in the early 2000s, after he had gone back to Harvard and received a PhD, he moved to New York, where he was a professor of music at Brooklyn College. And there in New York, he had a lot of playing opportunities with various folks. They wound up going on tour with a lot of them. And then he was invited to become a professor in South Africa. He has a long history of admiration for the South African people and their music as well. So that's where he's now located.
You know, when I listen to him, you mentioned that Coltrane, really often hear Coltrane talked about as this explosive innovator, but he's also the great lyric voice. And I guess that's what I hear with Salim Washington a lot.
Yeah, he has various influences. One is Train, of course. One is also Yusef Lateef and Rahsaan Roland Kirk. And he's also a very good composer as well, influenced by Charles Mingus and Thelonious Monk. So Eric Dolphy is another influence, playing and composition-wise. So he also doubles on a lot of different instruments, a lot of different reed instruments. Tenor saxophone is his primary instrument, but he also plays flute and oboe, bass clarinet. So you'll see a wide range of sounds
Lateef,
coming from
a real jack of all trades with the instruments there.
Yeah, so.
This has been the news, and we're talking about the Dudley Jazz Fest with Fred Woodard. Fred, another person on the lineup is Gabrielle Goodman, a vocalist. Tell me a little bit about her.
Well, Gabrielle, I was introduced to her by a pianist named George Russell Jr., and she's a vocal professor at Berkeley, but she's had a very varied career. She is not only a jazz vocalist, but she's also has a lot of experience with R&B and also gospel. And she's recorded 5 CDs, all of which reflect that wide range of vocal capabilities. And she's had a lot of different well-known artists record with her, like Kevin Eubanks, Gary Bartz, Gary Thomas, and other folks, Terry Lynn Carrington. So she's recorded not only straight ahead jazz, but also smooth jazz, where she's featured Walt Beasley, folks like that. And she also had a career as a backup vocalist for people like Roberta Flack and Freddie Jackson, Patti LaBelle. So she's had quite a varied career, and she's definitely an asset to the Berklee College of Music community.
You mentioned smooth jazz. I saw one of her clips that did look very smooth. I also saw her scat singing, and for people who haven't been exposed to that, talk about the appeal.
Well, the appeal of scat singing is the vocalist is elevated to the level of an instrumentalist. And people that are very good at it have gone through the process of learning the theoretical things behind that an artist needs to know, or a jazz musician needs to know, in order to really, truly do that type of singing justice. So she's obviously gone through the training needed for that, and also not only formal training, but also a lot of listening to the great artists that do that well, like Ella Fitzgerald. And she's also been, formally trained, of course, at Peabody Conservatory. So her versatility and her artistry reflects that, not only having studied, but also having experienced performing on stage with a lot of great artists.
You have the Lance Martin Jazz Trio in the lineup as well here, too?
Yeah, he's also a friend of mine from Berklee College of Music. We were at Berklee around the same time in the late 70s, early 80s. And his trio, sometimes it's a quartet, sometimes he has a drummer, but it consists of him on flute, and he plays various flutes, the standard flute also. He plays like a larger flute. I want to say it's alto, don't quote me on that. So he's a very versatile artist, and performs with a bass and guitar most of the time, a trio. Sometimes he'll add drums. And what he does is very interesting. He'll take requests from the audience. It kind of like makes it a kind of really entertaining and engaging type of performance. And so we should expect a lot of interesting things out of him, because he'll just ask an audience what they want to hear, and then he'll play the songs.
Plus, the staple of the Jazz Fest is the Fred Woodard Collective. Tell us a little bit about that. I've had my own groups in various sizes and formations since 1988, and this particular group includes my son on violin, and bassist Melvin Graham, and Matthew Williams on drums. So this group actually has been together in this formation for many years, since about 2011 or so. And with some people, subbing for the core members. And basically it's just a group where I play, the standard jazz repertoire along with my original material. I try to mix it up in terms of the different feels, like, swing, of course, sometimes Latin, sometimes, funk, R&B type things. I might mix in calypso feel. So I kind of mix up the different styles. However, I adapt them to a jazz format. Now, commonly with jazz combos, people expect the melody line to be carried by sax or trumpet, and there's you and your son. You're on guitar, your son's on violin. A lot of people say, a guitar and a violin? Can you do that?
Well, yes, it can be done, and quiet as it's kept, the violin has been around in jazz since the beginning.
Going back to Ellington, at least.
Yeah. And it fell out of favor only because of the fact that, the horn players can play louder, and there was always somebody back in history that played the violin, but the challenge was being heard. And I think today, with the advent of electronic instruments or electronic capabilities, the violin can now be heard. But the violin's been in jazz since the beginning, but it kind of fell out of favor once the horn players kind of took over. Trumpet, saxophone, of course, can play louder. But the violin's been there all along. It's just that there has been as many to popularize the instrument like there has with the horns.
Well, I heard you play with your son last year. I didn't hear any balance problems, so I highly recommend it. What about the way you feel playing, before the kind of audience that comes to these free events?
I enjoy it, because I think that if you play in a way that can reach the audience, that is, you keep your music, of course, at a level where you are challenged, but also there has to be an element to it that the audience can relate to. That's why I try to set up my program so that I have a various feels that people have heard before. That is, like sometimes I'll put in like a funk feel, or sometimes I'll put in calypso feel, or whatever. I kind of just mix things up so that I can hold people's attention. So I think if you play in a very genuine way, like from your heart, I think you'll reach people as long as you feel good about it. Usually that feeling can be communicated to the audience.
You sound like you're almost apologizing. I remember going to one festival once, and there was a piece that they played. It really rubbed shoulders with popular music, but I said, this is still great. There's nothing wrong with that, right?
Yeah. I mean, there are various opinions about that, but I think in some ways, if an artist feels that what they're doing is, if they really feel it, I think the audience will feel it as well. I mean, there's arguments of pro and con about that, but jazz has always absorbed other styles and adapted them to their particular format. A lot of the standards that are popular in jazz were like movie themes or Broadway show themes. So jazz has always done that. So, I don't really have any problem with adapting songs from other styles into my jazz performances.
I got to ask you one question about the younger generations out there, because you might have people now who've grown up in the neighborhoods here. Their ears have been sort of formed by hip hop, and they might be thinking, what does this have to do with the music that we like? Well, what would you say to somebody like that?
Well, that's probably the most challenging thing today in this present time, because a lot of the music kids listen to now is all computerized and so forth. And all I can say about that is I try to really, with the drums, keep a nice, real strong groove happening, and hopefully they can relate to that. And then sometimes, like I say, I put different feelings in the music and so forth. I try to not dumb down the music. My son is a resource for me. We might be doing something like that as part of our program, but I really go to my son and ask him, well, what's real popular now? So you might expect one song from us that is popular on the radio at this point, or popular in the mainstream as far as the young folks are concerned. But me and my son, I think we'll work something out so they get a little taste of it.
You can depend on him to bring you up to date. And finally, speaking of dates, we should remind our viewers when and where this is going to be happening.
Yeah, this will be held in a couple of weeks, Saturday, July 27th. And the time of the festival is from 12 p.m. to 6 p.m. And it will be held at the Mary Hannon Park, also known as the Mary Hannon Playground. And that's at 613 Dudley Street in Dorchester. And the rain location is pending, and we have a Facebook page. You just go to @Dudley Jazz, and you can find the Facebook page, like us on Facebook. And through that Facebook page, I will be keeping people updated on what's happening with the festival. And that's really, everything is already laid out as far as the time, location, and all that. But the rain location, that's something I will announce within the next week or so.
Thank you very much for being with us.
I appreciate it.
For the Dudley Jazz Fest, Fred Woodard will have more news in just a moment.